My favorite.
It's Judd's Hockey Show.
And welcome into the third Judd's Hockey Show of the week. We did one Monday talking about what was going to happen with the Wild's coaching situation. We did one Monday evening because the Wild made a coaching change. We did an emergency episode with me at US Bank Stadium before the Vikings game. And Declan talking about the firing of Dean Evason and the hiring of new coach John Hynes. And then the Wild played last night and they won. No surprise there. But as you can see, it's not just Judd and Declan. It's Jesse Pierce as well, who joins us each Wednesday. Bar Down Beauties fame, NHL.com. She does a great job covering the Wild. If there is a hockey event in this town, she is going to be at it. And speaking of that, speaking of the devil, she just got back from the Wild's practice. So, Jesse, you are both an analyst for us and an insider, dare I say so. Tell us what you gleaned today from John Hynes the day after the Wild breaks their 7-game losing streak.
I mean, first things first, the Minnesota Wild practiced at Trio Rink, which is something that they haven't done under the Dean Evason regime, especially after a win, especially on a travel day. The Minnesota Wild facing the Nashville Predators tomorrow. Ironically, John Hynes' old stomping grounds. He was fired from there May 30th, where they replaced him with Andrew Brunette. John Hynes, still a lot of watching from his perspective, and he's going to have to do that, right? I mean, he's going to have to quickly implement it, but with these 2 quick games, he also wants the team to kind of show him what they have so he knows what he's working with, which I think is a smart move. The one interesting tidbit I found from practice was he stopped and barked a little bit, not negatively, but certainly yelled and was teaching his techniques, which I think is good. Again, Dean was a little bit more soft-spoken sometimes on the ice, and as media members know, I think John Hynes might be ready to give them a little kick, but for now, he's playing it out, seeing how the chemistry works. I noticed him pulling Matt Zuccarello aside and some of the other longtime forwards that look on your yep. So we'll see how that goes. But ultimately, I mean, you'll see the same lines tomorrow in Nashville that you saw last night. The Minnesota Wild coming off that victory 3-1 against the Blues. But then there's plenty of time between then and the Chicago game for John Hynes to really put his fingerprint on this team, which the vocabulary word that he loves to use is speed. So he's going to work in that, I think, more for the Minnesota Wild.
Yeah, they definitely, in classic hockey fashion, had a little bit more of a, I like Jesse's word, bark there. They just, I know John Hynes can get a little angry, but they had a little bit more of a step with them yesterday. Of course, Matt Boldy finally scores a goal under a new head coach. So that'll just get the ball rolling naturally. Kirill Kaprizov will then just magically start playing very well. As I tongue-in-cheek tweeted out both of you last night, being, all I was telling you, they just needed John Hynes to get a PK figured out and get their second best player in the right direction in Matt Boldy. So that's all this team needed. They just needed a bald, bland, classic, quintessential hockey coach to get this team right back in the right direction.
Billy G's buddy.
Yeah,
They're good buddies.
That's it.
So Jesse, give me a couple things. Give me your thoughts on, because Dean being let go is the obvious headline, but Bob Woods, who was in charge of a PK that was just absolutely atrocious. How much do you think that is going to help things? The PK good last night, but St. Louis's power play is awful. And more importantly, let's talk about what happened here, because I'm still at sort of a loss. Like, I get it, it's hockey, but I'm at sort of a loss because, this team, let's just say it. Declan's probably right. They're not that good. Like, they're not this great team. They got some good players, a few, but here's what I don't get. The way that they played last night, which, by the way, John Hynes didn't come in and change things. He didn't put in a new system. He will probably, but he didn't. And I guess where I'm confused is what happened here to where this team was so lethargic, dead ass. Like, that's the thing that just really hit me. And last night we saw them compete. And if they compete, they can win some games. They're not going to beat everybody, but they're going to win games.
I mean, it's the best way to use guilt, maybe, is to leverage that into a good game, because all those guys felt guilty. They all really liked Dean Evason. I don't think Dean Evason necessarily ever lost control of the room. I question whether he fully had it necessarily, too, with all of the player closed-door meetings and all of this. But I mean, ultimately, Dean was the easiest one to go. That's the first chip to fall. And I think each and every player knew it's because we are not performing well. We are underwhelmingly performing terribly. And I think they recognized that and said, hey, between that and then losing 7 straight, because that is embarrassing. It is. They just were not playing good hockey. Now, granted, you saw spurts of good hockey within the past 3 games. Detroit game aside, the Colorado game, the Toronto game, and the Ottawa game, Minnesota looked like they were starting to kind of figure some things out. And again, still having some ugly mistakes. So no, John Hynes didn't do anything. That was still Bob Woods' penalty kill, and that was still Dean Evason's handprints all over that team. I just think the guilt of being like, holy cow, we got this guy fired. He lost his job. Because even today, the players were still talking about that. I spoke with Marc-Andre Fleury, and he was like, it's sad. We cost somebody their job because we as players couldn't get it together. So I think they've realized that. And again, the frustration combined. So it'll be interesting. That's why I want to give John Hynes kind of the benefit of the doubt. Again, he hasn't put anything on this team just yet. And this team isn't dramatically changed because they beat an up and down St. Louis Blues team, right? So still some time to be told. Nashville's very hot right now, so that's going to be a big game. And then Chicago coming to town on Sunday afternoon. I mean, those 2 games, the Chicago game in particular, you'll see a little bit more of Hynes in. I would have to imagine maybe with line changes or different systems in place. But ultimately, I think the team felt guilty for getting Dean fired.
Yeah, I saw the Foligno interview pre-puck drop last night, and, you could tell it he was super disappointed. And, what he got here during the first era, or towards the end of the Boudreau era, I believe Marcus did, and then, really kind of blossomed under Dean with a big offensive season and kind of fell into the Moose role of being a fan favorite and whatnot. So you can tell that they're upset. It is interesting because I think the vibe is different from, what we've experienced as media members or fans or whoever. We have experienced, 4 of these type of coaching changes now in the last 10 years between Yo and Boudreau and now Dean. So, we're kind of used to this to a degree, and they're all been very uniquely done. The Boudreau one kind of wasn't surprising, but the timing a little bit was surprising. The Yo one, I mean, my God, that was like the definition of just a colossal combustion of attitudes and a coach being unfortunately in over his head. And then with Dean, it just kind of felt like, well, this is the scapegoat. I don't think Dean didn't necessarily do anything wrong like Yo, where he lost the room or he just wasn't qualified. And I don't think it was a complete shock like Boudreau, where Bruce was definitely on the hot seat and was entering a contract year, but you knew the writing was on the wall, but the rug got pulled out maybe a little sooner than we thought. And it is interesting how this team responds now, because it is a quintessential hockey thing for it to happen where they go out like they did yesterday and play really well. To Jess's point, do they play a lot better against the Predators tomorrow? That'll be a better test, but I'm trying to weigh how much is this legitimate, and then also is this team really going to be any different than it was for the first 6 to 7 weeks of the season?
What do you think, Jess?
No, they're not going to be any different. I mean, I'm sorry. I think this team is what they is, and I've been kind of fighting Warriors the past couple of days because everyone's like, well, it's the same team as last year. Last year's team wasn't that good. They were lucky. They got 103 points because they would get some lucky bounces at the end. They were some come from behind victories. I mean, they weren't, you're right. It's the same team for all intents and purposes, but that wasn't that great of a team either. It's a mediocre team with some better than average players on it. And I think that's just who the Minnesota Wild are. And I think that's okay. I think there needs to be kind of this sigh of it's okay that that's what they are. I mean, you can't change that dynamic. A new coach isn't going to change that dynamic. You can't trade your way out of problems, as we've discussed. You can level it out. You can play better hockey. You can play simple hockey. That doesn't mean they need to go rattle off an 8-game win streak to counter this. They certainly need to go in there. But I think you're going to see them performing a little bit harder than they have. I think now that they got that streak off their back, they'll come in, but it's going to be low-scoring games. I think you're going to see 2-1, 3-2. I mean, it's going to be those tight games which aren't nearly as exciting and which can be a little bit harder to win, but I think that's how the Minnesota Wild are going to have to do it, which maybe is also part of this shock to the system that they're going to have to realize. They're not the Kevin Fiala of years past where they're flying down in this high-octane offense. Nope, that's just not who you guys are.
Well, and to your point, I thought the first period last night, I still thought that they were a little bit shell-shocked, but then in the second, I thought they started to play really well, and they put on pressure. Binnington made some nice saves, but just that's the one thing. We didn't see more goals.
No,
it's not like they won 5-1 and pulled away. So, but here's the thing that I'm sort of split between you and Dex. The thing that I'm wondering, because yes, top to bottom, this team is not there's no there's no switch to flip and all of a sudden they start to score a ton of goals or look great. But what I want to see is this, and these are the guys that I fault for Dean being fired, and it's like why I thought Dean had to go. It's what you referred to, Jesse, the upper echelon players. Like Zuccarello again last night. I mean, he had a couple of just golden chances, and I don't know what's. I mean, he can score goals. That's allowed. The rule book, I looked it up. Zuccarello can score goals, but Kaprizov. I mean, here's my problem. If we're going to look at their upper echelon players and be like, yeah, they're okay, but then the pressure all comes down on one guy, and that's Bill Guerin. And I don't care what they've done farm system wise, because I know that there's prospects, and I know that the future in some ways looks very bright. So keep that in mind. But if we're going to say, well, Boldy is, I mean, he's sort of who he is, and Carrill's going to disappear at times now. And Zuccarello, I mean, he's sort of old. To me, that's a Bill Guerin problem, because you've just signed, in the case of Boldy and Zuccarello and that group, you've just signed guys, and Spurgeon. I mean, Spurgeon, I haven't seen him much. Those are the guys I expect a lot more from. So I'm not willing to accept that they're okay. If they're okay, then your GM, in my opinion, is in trouble.
Let me say this too, because I feel like there is a misconception that because Bill Guerin, hashtag friend of the show, has come on this program a lot, that we are Bill Guerin defenders no matter what. And I think it's safe to say that all three of us, and I'll even put myself maybe at the top of this mountain, question those extensions by the thousandth degree, right? I had no idea why they were signing those veteran players. But at the end of the day, everyone knew, even if Bill Guerin is at fault here for this poor start and for those contract extensions, he wasn't going anywhere. Like, Bill Guerin wasn't going to be reprimanded, wasn't going to be fired, wasn't going to be let go for those decisions. And unfortunately, it did fall on Dean. I think that's unfair. Yes, of course, from a human element or even just a workplace manner, seeing someone be fired like that, completely unfair. But Guerin wasn't going to go anywhere. So this ends up falling on the coach because because this team sold this bill of goods, to Jess's point of, no, they're a 103-point team. Well, they've kind of overachieved to a degree. I think that the best chance the Wild had to make a run was 2 years ago when they faced the Blues and they lost, and they had that high-octane offense. That was the time, in my opinion, for them to probably make a run, and they fell completely on their face in that first-round series. Last year wasn't the case, and obviously they overachieved. So unfortunately, Dean was the one that had to go. But Bill Guerin, let it be known, deserves plenty of criticism, and rightfully so, for the contract extensions he handed out.
I would completely agree. And you know what? It was probably very admirable, because we asked Bill Guerin, do you regret those contract decisions? And it's never the money for me. That was never the money. It was the commitment to the term for some of those guys. And it was the time. You didn't want to wait the season out. You didn't want to see how Ryan Hartman and Marcus Foligno were going to perform. I get Matt Zuccarello. You're trying to keep Kirill happy more than likely. You want to say he's going to be around. But it was the time in which he did it, and it was the length of time. Because, again, we talk about the great prospects down in Iowa, and we've got all these really good developing players. You're not giving them that opportunity. But Bill Guerin, true to who he is, stood right by him. He said, I know a lot of people probably think I'm crazy. I stand by these decisions. And he has to, because he has to wear that, because now that Dean Evason is gone, now that card has been played, Bill Guerin, this is Bill Guerin's team. It's his guys. He's picked every single thing. He is all over this team. And so the next one to fall would have to be him, because these are all of his decision making. And most of the time it turns out better than we expect. We're heavy on the criticism when they're first made. And usually Bill Guerin somehow magically waves his little wand and it turns out to be okay. This year, I don't know if that's the case. Again, it just feels off. Everything kind of just feels off kilter. And that's probably due to the losing streak and the slow start. But just really, I don't know how you get that back. Bill Guerin talked about Dean Evason not having that it factor and the whole team not having that it factor. And I asked him, I said, what is the it factor? And he's like, that swagger, that confidence. I don't know that that's going to come back after 1, 2, 3 games. You're going to have to do a lot more than that.
And that's 2 consecutive years, because he said the same exact thing after the Reeves trade at Thanksgiving last year. What I'm hoping can come from this, because I do think that Bill and Judd Brackett, who's their scouting director, who does a good job, he's very good. I do think that they are building something here that can have success long term. But here's what I hope. And this goes back to the Goligoski contract, which was ridiculous. The Merrill contract, ridiculous. I mean, those two are just irresponsible contracts. But what I hope is this, and I think Bill Guerin was slapped with this reality, unfortunately. And, he gave out all of those extensions. And to be honest, I feel like a lot of guys started this season playing comfortable. Well, I got my contract. I'm in good shape. I got a no move clause, which again, I would not hand those out. But it feels to me like the one thing Bill has to accept, and I know he's a longtime player, and I know that he was a captain, and I know that this is probably very difficult to transition from the locker room to the front office, but it's this. Loyalty can only go so far, right?
Yeah.
Because just to your point, you're right. You've got guys in Iowa that probably very soon deserve to be here. And by the way, those guys, one, they might be talented, but two, they'll work their asses off. And you're giving out contracts to everybody who comes by who you like. Like when you look at Foligno and Hartman and Zuccarello, let's just pick two, maybe one, like the Zuccarello Dex, the Zuccarello contract. We talked about though, but I sort of got that one, right? Kaprizov, Zuccarello, peanut butter and jelly. I sort of got that, but like, why are you giving out extensions to people who are aging? And by the way, I could tell you as an old guy, sometimes when you get security, it's the worst thing you could possibly do.
You just talk
like
about
that's
Social
the
Security,
lesson.
like that,
No, Social
That's a good
Security be
one.
long gone in 10 years. So I'm not counting on that.
But yeah, that part was interesting, and that's where the Hartman one, and I think even when did he re-sign Goudreau? Was that last at the New Year, I believe, of last? I forget when that timing happened.
It was during yes.
Why are you giving like a 6-year contract to an incredibly replacement level player?
Right.
And the Hartman one is just like vindictive, I think, on my end at this point. But like, I didn't understand why those two especially got handed out. I just didn't think it was worth it. The Goligoski one was simply because they were scratching him so much, and he was like 2 games away from his 1,000th game that they handed him a new contract to say, "We promise we'll get you to 1,000 games next year." That's the only reason.
But it had a
they
complete
gave
no
him
move.
that extension. Yes,
Yeah.
and the no move was also hilarious because they didn't want him to go anywhere. He negotiated that.
Well, we asked Bill Guerin because that's the biggest problem with these contracts. He slaps on no moves for Hartman and Foligno to get these contracts done. And he's like, well, because the guys like them. Well, sure, the guys like them. Of course they do. It gives them that stability, but it doesn't need to be done. Give it to them next year. Hold out a little bit longer. Grow some balls, Billy. Like, let's do something.
Wow.
Like, push back on that.
Wow, Jesse coming after Billy Guerin.
I did. I went a little toe-to-toe with him yesterday. I didn't get any of the answers I needed. Never do. But still love him. And
Yeah,
again,
it's not personal.
It's easy to be critical right now. And because in my head, I'm like, this is going to work out. We're all going to be like, oh, of course, Billy does it again. But this year, I just don't know. It doesn't.
But does it? Like they don't win in the playoffs. I don't think it. Do I think he's a disaster? Absolutely not. Okay. Mm-hmm. But do I think it works out? They haven't been past the first round of the playoffs since what, 2015 with Chuck Fletcher. Do I think it works out? You got John Hynes. You didn't run a coaching search, and it sounds like a multi-year contract. Like, I don't know it works out. I feel like there's a loyalty here that's misguided because, I'm sorry, professional sports is all about keeping people relatively uncomfortable. They're athletes. They're competitors. Like, they're not wired like you and me and Declan. So I don't know that it does. I like the guy because he's a hockey guy and he's fun to talk to. And he was a great player. So I like where he's coming from. I don't know that from a manager standpoint, though. I don't know it does work out. And quite frankly, I don't think I would have turned around and given my friend John Hynes a multi-year contract instantly. Sorry.
There is a weird trust level from Leopold because, if you look at the last 3 GMs that they've had, like Chuck Fletcher, you saw the writing on the wall. This was running its course and he was going to move on. He had to fire Paul Fenton after basically workplace issues and not necessarily all hockey issues. And then there's Bill Guerin, who's a cup winner, incredibly well-respected among his peers, climbing the ranks as an executive, and it's obviously a hands-off approach. And Craig, who's more of a fan, has this trust level in Bill of all that pedigree that I laid out of, well, he trusts him. He trusts him to make these decisions. And to Judd's point, there has to still be some type of accountability and some type of uncomfort. Like, even look, Judd and I have bosses. Jesse has a boss. Like, you want to have a good relationship with your boss, but at the end of the day, there is a line that, you still have to know. As much as you might like your boss, there's a comfort line there that you can't really cross before you'd be surprised if something bad happens. So the whole thing is very weird that I think Leopold trusts Guerin because of all the pedigree I laid out, and it's so much more different than Chuck Fletcher, who would just love to wheel and deal and make random trades for Sean Bergenheim, and then Paul Fenton, who was just, let's be honest, a really bad person to be around. So he just gives Guerin basically the benefit of the doubt.
I feel like Guerin, though, but I will say this, though. I feel like there is a silver lining if you begin to cut the cord with some of these vets, because I do think they're building up a system. And I think Jesse hit it right on the head. There has to be room. There has to be room. Like they still be, and it's partially because of the cap problems, but they're still calling up guys from Iowa as basically place fillers instead of, there's some decent players there. What's the kid's name? Murmis, the defenseman?
Mm-hmm.
Dakota Murmis.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't mind him. I'd rather watch him than Johnny Merrill. I'd rather watch him than a lot of those guys on that third pairing defense. So that's what I think that Bill Guerin and Judd Brackett might be just on the right track, but you just can't have all of these basically pieces have filled up your chessboard, and you can't get the pieces that should be eventually ascending up here.
I mean, because that's exactly what it is. It's funny. I've been calling for a rebuild as of late. I think a rebuild should have started to happen last year because you knew that these salary cap restraints were going to be so hard. I think Bill Guerin obviously knew that. I don't think he recognized how truly difficult it was going to be. Like you said, you can't recall a player. If you wanted to bench Matt Boldy because he continued to perform poorly, you couldn't do that unless you wanted to go 11-7 because you can't recall another forward good enough to replace him with Ryan Hartman on suspension right now, obviously. But I mean, it's just, even in those situations, you are two hands behind your back. I mean, last year Dean had one hand behind his back. This year it was two because there was so little that you can do with this roster. And a rebuild allows room for young players. That's what a rebuild is. Right now, that's not what's happening. And that's Bill Guerin's excited about that. That's a Craig Leopold thing. Ever since Craig Leopold has taken over this Minnesota Wild organization, he refuses to go into a rebuild. He'd prefer to get into the first round. But it's kind of silly. It's like, why? Especially when you're hearing all this greatness that Judd Brackett can find these players, and oh my gosh, and the Iowa players are so good. You never get to see them. You won't get to see them because they're no longer these young, fresh, amazing, talented players when they're 26, 27, 28 years old, finally getting into the NHL. You got to do what Detroit's done. You got to do what Anaheim's done. And I mean, yes, it's not exactly fun. It's not easy, but I would rather that and know that you have a contender 5 years down the road, 6 years down the road, than watch what we're witnessing and watch the just enough, because it's not enough anymore at this point. I mean, especially this core that Bill Guerin has attached himself to. It's one of the less talented cores, I think, that the Wild have had in years. I mean, Nino Niederreiter, Charlie Coyle, and Mikhail Granlund, that was probably, and Jason Zucker, probably a better core together that I would have looked at extension than Marcus Foligno and Ryan Hartman.
So if John Hynes wants speed, boys and girls, which I love, okay, it's 2024 just about, that's awesome. But I got a question. If John Hynes wants speed, and he's going to tell this team, all right, I want to play with speed. And I think a couple of years ago, this team had the speed to play the way that John Hynes is going to want. Does the 2023-24 Wild have enough overall talent and speed to play that game and win consistently?
No.
No.
But I mean, that's my point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like he's going to come in here, and I will say this. I think a couple of years back, 2 or 3 years back, they did play at pace, and it was fun to watch. But I think with where things stand now and again, aging players, I don't know that you can. I mean, can you play it that way some nights? Sure you can. Can you play that way consistently? I guess I don't get it.
Yeah,
I hate to be a downer, but
yeah, they don't have those horses to play. Mm-hmm. And to Jess's point, now they're really like the Wild have always been that classic national narrative of never good to be elite and never bad to be, tanking. But now they are like firmly tires in the mud of that. They are not getting out of that drift either. They are stuck in where they are here. And with those extensions that you handed out, yeah, you probably could have had a couple trade pieces that wouldn't have netted you like franchise altering moves. But, to stockpile a couple day 2 or day 3 NHL draft picks to a degree, or I should say mid-round draft picks, still helps you out and still figures out some salary cap stuff. And they still have to do this one more time for a full season next year with these buyouts. So that's where it just, to me, made no sense to hand them out. And that's where, they don't have the speed. They don't have the talent. Can they get on a winning streak here and win a couple games coming up? Of course they could. It's hockey. But it's not going to be a team that I probably really take seriously unless it just completely takes off the rest of the way.
Jesse, if this team continues to be okay or worse, who can they, when the deadline arrives, who can they trade? Like, what do they have to trade? Probably, to Declan's point, for draft picks. But like draft picks, when you have a guy like Brackett, draft picks are important because he's going to probably have a decent chance to hit on said picks. With all of the no move clauses that have been handed out now, who can they move, do you think?
Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Boldy. You guys want to do that? Should we do that? We could do that. Brock Faber. You could do that. All of that. Still look good.
No,
Marco Rossi,
is there anyone? Like, is there
There
any
is. I mean,
decent-
you have. It's funny. I just looked this up the other day. Okay, I've got it now. Kirill Kaprizov, Matt Boldy, Jules Eriksson Ek, Brandon Duhaime, Connor Dewar, Vinny Lettieri, Jake Middleton, and John Merrill are your only players without any sort of protection on this team as of right now. Marco Rossi is under his ELC, so that has a little bit of protection with him, as is Brock Faber. That's it. That's all you got, and you're not going to do that with any of those players. I mean, it's just not going to happen, unfortunately. I don't think Marcus Johansson comes back. I think this is his final year of his extension, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, that'll free up, what's he at, $2 million? So, yeah, he's a free agent next year. And that's all you got.
Bust.
Yeah.
Thanks for showing up, JoJo.
We're getting the
You've
old
literally
JoJo
got
that
your-
we didn't want.
He got his contract. He literally got his contract and has disappeared. I mean, it's unbelievable. I was trying to watch his shifts last night because I'm like, what's happened to this guy? It's just, it's not good. It's not good, but
It's tough to see. Yeah, I mean, and Bill Guerin doesn't like to trade his draft picks because, as you mentioned, there is faith in Judd Brackett, and Judd Brackett's been successful.
I agree
in his
with
time
that.
here, right?
I want to trade your players for draft
Yeah.
picks, but like to your point, they don't have guys that they can trade.
They don't have guys that they can trade.
Is there
Tough
anything? Is there anything? Okay, they won a game. They've got a game against Nashville on Thursday. Let's go around the room and start with Declan. What is one positive thing? I can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm going to.
Yep.
What's one positive thing that you can say about the Minnesota Wild?
Like as currently constructed.
Anything. Just find anything. You might like the organist. I personally not a huge fan of the
Don't
DJ
get me
there,
started
but
on the
I'm
music selection.
I'm
they haven't
it's-
changed it since 2004.
Oh no,
You know
dude,
my
you got to come to a
feelings on
game.
this.
It's gotten better.
Has it gotten better?
It's changed.
Oh,
It's a
sorry.
DJ
I have been
now.
boycotting for these reasons. So
It's like a
better?
club. It's like
Yeah,
a club.
it's kinda
there.
fun.
All right. If I heard
It's
Bon
a DJ.
Jovi one more time, I was
No.
going to lose
No,
my
no.
mind.
It's a DJ.
Oh, thank God. All right. Well,
In
that's
warm-ups,
good.
too.
That's good. I'll give you an actual one. Too. I think Marco Rossi taking the next step has been good. I think Marco Rossi taking this next step finally after looking like he could be a potential bust and a big. I mean, how many times have we asked Bill Guerin or fans asked Bill Guerin to find yourself a number one center to make this team better? And I think Rossi is finally tracking in the direction of being maybe not the exact, player ceiling that he was projected to be, but he is a more than capable NHL player, and he's a good piece to build around. So having Marco Rossi, I think, finally break out here is good news if you're a Wild fan.
What do you got, Jesse?
That's the easy one. There's nothing else
Yep.
good about this. No,
Glad you let me go first.
this team doesn't have Corey Perry, thank God. That's what we can go with. I don't know, right? It's
Have
been
we found
millions
out
on
yet?
that.
Do we know yet what happened?
I think it was it's an employee situation. I never
Yeah.
believed the rumors. Those rumors.
Oh, the
were so
rumor
big,
wasn't
it
true,
was
yeah.
just ridiculous.
But the Blackhawks allowed this because they don't do any because they're so
I don't-
unproactive.
And Dubas, he didn't, or not, was it Kyle Dubas? Who's the
No,
GM? They're not
Davidson.
Kyle Dubas. Excuse
Kyle
me.
Davidson, but
Davidson.
but they look like
He-
the same guy.
He didn't help himself at all with those. Like, I thought his PR, like the PR of those statements, I was like, this is not
Well,
I
going
mean,
over well.
to their point, they did what they promised they would. They they pulled him out of the lineup
Right.
immediately, effectively went in, did their research, and then were like, all right, we're done. So, I mean, they stuck true to their attempt at changing the culture, but
it was such
a
a hockey thing. It was such a Gary Bettman's National Hockey League PR blunder. And the Blackhawks don't get, and they shouldn't, they don't get the benefit of the doubt from anyone now.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing too, is they,
Except for draft lotteries.
yeah, well, you know what I was thinking last night? If I'm Bedard, do I say, hey, you know what, guys, I really appreciate all you've done here, but I don't think you're the right place for me.
Hard pass.
I don't think you're the right place for me. I think I'd rather go to Florida. I think I'd rather go to
Paul
the
Maurice would be a good
Kings.
fun coach.
Yeah. The Blackhawks are a great, like, historic franchise, but they're such a dumpster fire. Anyway, I'm sorry. Positives,
But
Jesse.
and similar to Marco Rossi being a layup, Brock Faber as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it continues to astound me. Yesterday when we were speaking to him about the coaching change, like how well spoken he is. It's a reminder that he's done this for so long with Team USA and with the Gophers and everything. So I mean, he's just wise beyond his years, and I love speaking to him because he's so intuitive and he's just so I better than I can speak half the time. And he performs well. I mean, I think there are two players that have showed up every night to every game, and he is one of them along with Marco. I think those are the only two guys that I've really trusted. And that's a part of what could be the future of your rebuild. Matt Boldy, once he gets this figured out, because he will, I know he will also be a part of that conversation. But I think Fabes is the other big, bright, shining star for your Minnesota Wild.
As a person who's there on a daily basis, I have a question about Brock off the ice for you. Mm-hmm. Does it seem odd at all? And I know he's a really, really smart kid, and he is, to your point, well-spoken. But does it seem odd at all that he's being looked to by the press as like a go-to veteran quote? I just thought it was interesting that he's talking about Dean, and he seems like he's been playing for 10 years. And I saw Spurgeon was quoted, but it was sort of the Spurgeon-esque. Like, it seems odd to me. Kudos to Brock, first of all. I'm not criticizing him at all.
Yeah.
But it seems odd to me that he's like a go-to guy in his rookie season in a sport where ordinarily seniority is like a big deal.
I think that, so yesterday's situation, because there were so many scrums going on, Brock just happened to be one of the last ones in the room, and so he was there while everybody else scattered and hid, right? So, I mean, Spurgeon and Marcus paid the piper because they're wearing the letters, and then Brock...
But that's my point.
But that's the thing. I don't know that he's necessarily being selected for a reason other than the fact that he's there. He hasn't wised up to, no, media's coming in. Again, well-spoken. And then he's got the Minnesota aspect. So Bally loves that angle. A lot of the other local writers can sometimes lean on that a little bit. So I don't know that we're like, oh, we got to talk to Brock. We got to get his thoughts. And they're good thoughts. But that, to me, is just because it's kind of like, well, he's here. And out of the younger players, he is probably one of the more well-spoken ones. So, I mean, given that choice, because sometimes it's nice to mix it up, right? Between Spurge and Foligno, and like not just bug them or not just bug Boldy all the time. Like, let's get someone in there. So that's probably why you're seeing more of it. But that's my hunch anyway.
My positive is this. John Hynes, it's going to take a long look at this team. Long, hard look. And John Hynes is hopefully going to put this team in the image that he wants. Perhaps that might be some changes. Leadership changes. Captain changes. That's my positive. My positive is that I am going to shake up the locker room again. Until I get this right, damn it, I'm going to shake it up.
You want to will this in more than you want John.
I'm
Hynes.
so tired of the
happening.
Wild's choices at captain. I know it's not happening, and I don't care. You know what? Unlike Bill Guerin, I don't care about feelings. I am so tired of going from Mikko Koivu, I don't say much. Well, you don't say much because you're a dead ass, to, Jared Spurgeon, who's having Thanksgiving dinner. He's the captain because he has everyone to his house.
What's wrong with having a Thanksgiving dinner with his teammates?
He should be the planner. I love that. He should be. Doesn't make him captain material.
Oh my God.
Doesn't make him captain material. He's the room mother of the team. That's awesome. Good for him. That doesn't qualify him for the C.
I want you to bring this up with Phil. I want Phil to hear this take.
Doesn't qualify him for the C.
He has Thanksgiving dinner.
It's such a Minnesota. It's such
not
a
good enough
Minnesota
for me.
It's such a Minnesotan thing, though. Oh, you have dinner for us. Oh, we should name him captain. He's our guy. I mean, do you remember Dean would always say, "Oh, when things get bad on the bench, Jared's there to say, come on, guys, it's gonna be fine."
That's
you
not
go
what
into a
little 12-year-old voice. Hi, guys. It's going to be fun.
It's going to be okay. And guess what? One, that got Dean fired because it didn't work. And two, if you aren't using F-bombs to tell your teammates to get their asses in gear, then there's something wrong. New leadership. John Hynes. Look at me, John. Look at me.
Oh, good luck.
Look at me. Look at me. All right, guys. Great stuff. Great show. Very spirited. Jesse, you brought your fastball. You told the GM to get balls. I
did say that.
I'm guessing that this will get back to him. It'll be outstanding. You probably won't be happy with any of us. And you know what? That's okay. Billy.
Thanks, Billy.
It's nothing personal. It's all about effing championships. Dex?
Pass, shoot, score, and hit the subscribe button for daily Minnesota sports entertainment.